Isaiah, the most prolific prophet writing in the Old Testament, other than Moses. Moses probably wrote. But of all the books we have named after prophets, his is the longest. He also seems to have prophesied for the longest period of time. So who was he? What do we know about Isaiah? And when exactly was he prophesying? Now, as I mentioned, when we were reading in 2 Chronicles chapter 26, we get a mention of Isaiah, where in this case it says, if you want to, the rest of the acts of Uzziah are written by Isaiah. That's the first reference we have to Isaiah in the scriptures. Isaiah himself states that he began to prophesy in the days of Uzziah, but he also prophesied in the days of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, and his son Ahaz, and his son Hezekiah. Now, Jotham reigned for 16 years. Ahaz reigned for 16 years. Hezekiah for 29 years. So 16, 16, and 29. That's 32 plus 29 is 61. Plus a few years during the reign of Uzziah. Isaiah was prophesying for over 60 years. Now, the scripture, the Bible, none of the scriptures really, tell us really anything about him. He's called the son of Amos. I have heard a theory, not sure I believe it, a theory though, that Amos is just another spelling of Amos, and that his father is the prophet Amos. I kind of doubt it myself. I don't know. It's possible, but we don't really know. Amos, we don't know. Anyways, moving on. Who was he? With most prophets, we have no idea, no clue who they are. Their family relations, all this stuff, there's no record of it anywhere, not even in legends. But we have some information about old Isaiah, so let us talk about it. This comes from Jewish tradition, the Talmud, and the Masoretic texts, and these things. We get Jewish traditions. Now, take it as you will, it might be true, might not. But according to this tradition, his father, Amos, was the brother of King Amaziah. In other words, he would be cousin to King Uzziah, because Amaziah is Uzziah's father. So if Amaziah and Amos are brothers, then Isaiah and Uzziah would be cousins. Now, this tradition continues to state that Isaiah's daughter is Hephzibah. She is the wife of King Hezekiah, meaning Hezekiah is his son-in-law. Now, does this family relation really work out very well? Well, considering that he started prophesying in the days of Uzziah, it is possible that his father was Uzziah's uncle. That works. But then we have Jotham reigns for 16 years, and Ahaz reigns for 16 years, and then Hezekiah becomes king. So this is 30 years later that Hezekiah becomes king. Now, Hezekiah is 25 when he becomes king. If he got married when he was, could have gotten married young, really, say 18, possibly even 16. So let's say 16. We're still talking, 25 years later? 25 years after the death of Uzziah, which means that Hezekiah, his daughter, it's a possibility. It's possible that he had a daughter younger. It could also be that this is slightly an error, and that Hephzibah is his granddaughter, which might make more sense. Now, of course, this is all just Jewish tradition. It's not proven. It's not in the scriptures. We don't have any actual prophets stating this. But for these kind of things, I think the Jewish tradition in general can be trusted. I think this is I think it is not unlikely that he had this relation to the kings of Judah. Now, if he had this relation to the kings of Judah, this means that he is also a descendant of King David, and thus a descendant of Judah. So he would be in the royal line. He would not be in the he'd be in the royal family, but not in the royal line. That'd be the appropriate way of putting it. So it's just an interesting tradition. I find it very fascinating that he could have these relations, these familial relations with the kings of Judah. But now, after prophesying for 64 years, the Bible doesn't actually record his death. But again, Jewish tradition tells us that he was killed by the king Manasseh. Now, Manasseh was Hezekiah's son. So if these family relations are correct, then Manasseh would be his grandson. And according to the Jewish tradition, in order to escape this persecution under King Manasseh, he hides in a cedar tree, and Manasseh has the tree cut down, which in doing so, as it says, saws him asunder, cuts him in half. How much of that story is true, I'm not sure. I don't doubt that he was martyred, that he was killed by Manasseh, and I don't doubt that he was cut in half, as they say, sawn asunder. Now, him hiding in a cedar tree and being cut in half, that's a bit. It's not just talking about climbing up into the branches. They mean actually inside the trunk, is what the story says. He kind of merged himself into the tree. So I doubt that happened. Did he hide in a cedar tree? Maybe. Was he caught? Probably. Was he sawn asunder? Likely. Now, the details might have gotten mixed up in there a bit. But now let's talk about the book of Isaiah, his writing. Isaiah is the most quoted prophet in all Scripture. He is quoted the most by the New Testament writers. He is quoted the most in the Book of Mormon. He is quoted the most in the Doctrine and Covenants. He is just his writing is kind of the focal point of all other prophets. They all seem to focus in on him. Even some Old Testament prophets seem to quote Isaiah. Micah actually has a prophecy that is almost word for word the same as Isaiah chapter 2. He adds in a few extra details, but it's very similar. So Isaiah is and it was Jesus Christ who said, "Great are the prophecies of Isaiah." And Nephi in the Book of Mormon states that he read Isaiah. We have all these Isaiah chapters in the Book of Mormon, which we will read when we get to the Book of Mormon. But we have all these chapters in the Book of Mormon because Nephi thought that the words of Isaiah were of special significance. Now this brings me to just a brief thing again. As it said, as scholars say about many prophets, they think that it was written over the course of several decades, possibly centuries, by multiple authors. And the reason for this, especially with Isaiah, is that Isaiah is describing events that happened much later. But he is describing them almost as if they had already happened, or were in the process of happening. And so people read that, especially scholars who don't believe in prophecy, and they say, oh, well, he couldn't have been writing that unless it was during the time that these were actually happening. Unless it was during the time that these things were actually happening. But this is honestly, Isaiah is the greatest example of the prophetic gift. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details of how the scholars interpret this, because I don't think it really matters that much. It's an interesting thing if you want to look it up. But for my purposes, it's not really important because, as I said, these theories are based on a rejection of prophecy. And if we accepted these theories, then we have to accept the rejection of prophecy and undermine everything that these prophets did, everything that they said. So I just don't bother with it. Now, I do agree with this, that Isaiah wrote his book in stages. And there does seem to be a very clear distinction that chapters 1 through 39 have several historical references. And it says during the reign of Ahaz, this was happening. It even gives some historical narrative in here at certain points. But after that, it is all symbolic prophecy, and there is no definite historical anchor for it. And so I think these two sections were probably written at different times, but they were still written by Isaiah. Now, because of this, it is difficult to place the chronology of every chapter of Isaiah. The main part, that main prophetic ending of it, I'm going to read probably all at once near the end of his time, so during the reign of Hezekiah. The other parts, I try to piece it, and we'll read it in parts. We'll read some chapters, then we'll go back to the histories, even read some of the other prophets before we return to Isaiah, because it does skip around in the histories a little bit, and I try my best to put each of these sections in their historical context. Now, the first 6 chapters seem to have been written, or be not necessarily written at the time, but spoken at the time that Uzziah was still the king. And chapter 6 states that it was written in the same year that Uzziah died. Now, since we have just read the histories and the death of Uzziah and the beginning of the reign of Jotham, I figured this was a good spot to put these 6 chapters. End of Uzziah, beginning of Jotham, that's about when these 6 chapters would have been written. When we get into chapter 7, that picks us up in the reign of Ahaz. And so we will not start reading that until we get into the reign of Ahaz in the history. And so you'll see how Isaiah will be broken up. He prophesied over a period of over 60 years. So his work has to be divided among these 60 years as best as we can make it. So we will be reading the first 6 chapters of Isaiah and then returning to our histories, and I will see you in that. Before I sign off, I do want to add on here, please like, subscribe, comment, ring the notifications, all those good things that help us move the channel along. We are actually over 460 subscribers now. The goal is 500 by October. If things progress as they've been going, we might hit that 500 mark sometime in July. And if we do, we will update our goal. But anyways, we'll see you in the next reading.